Again, welcome. My name is Stephanie Johnson, and this is my first annual Warrior Women 2020 Stories from the Battleground. And as you all probably know, July is Uterine Fibroids Awareness Month. So I decided to take this time while we kind of still on lockdown from COVID-19 to actually get more on the internet and bring some women together from all parts of the world to talk about their experience with uterine fibroids. I think, again, that these are stories that need to be heard. And I'm, of course, pleased to host this conference. I formed an organization a few years ago entitled Denise Johnson Foundation. We focused on fibroids research, as well as some real estate investment and literacy, because by trade or education, I'm actually an English professor. Okay, so I kind of tied everything into that organization, but tonight we are focusing on uterine fibroids. And the purpose of the conference is to raise awareness regarding uterine fibroids because many people still don't know too much about it. Now, I went to the CDC's website, and on their website, it says that uterine fibroids are the most common non-cancerous tumors in women of childbearing age. And fibroids are made of muscle cells and other tissues that grow in and around the wall of the uterus, also known as the female womb. Now, the cause of fibroids is unknown. Now, this article was 2018, so about 2 years ago. Risk factors include being African American and being overweight. And the symptoms of fibroids include heavy or painful periods or bleeding between periods, feeling full in the lower abdomen, urinating often, pain during sex, lower back pain, reproductive problems such as infertility, multiple miscarriages, and early labor. And guess what? Even with all of that, some women still don't have symptoms, so they don't even know that these tumors, although benign, are growing inside of their womb. And actually, I was one of those women several years ago. I had no clue that these tumors were going inside of my womb. So I'm going to step away from the research just for a second, and I just want to give my experience, talk about my experience with uterine fibroids, about the discovery of it, researching it, learning about the different treatments, trying to understand the causation, and then finally how I overcame it, and then I'll turn it over to my special guests and my panelists so that they can also share their stories. So here's mine. In 2008, my battle with this condition began as my career as a college professor began. I discovered it when I went to give blood, and I was told that I could not donate blood because I was anemic, meaning that I had low iron in my blood, so I couldn't give blood. So upon following up regarding the anemia, following up with my doctor, I was told that I was developing uterine fibroids. Now, mind you, a few years earlier, and I kind of spiritually believed that I was being prepared for this, a church friend of mine told me about hers and how it made it difficult for her to conceive, but she did conceive, and thank God she has a healthy daughter to this day. But unfortunately, my case was not the same. In short, I had the textbook symptoms. I had the heavy bleeding, the cramping, all of that. And despite trying home remedies, which did help alleviate the symptoms, and despite consulting with several doctors, uterine fibroids miscarried 2 of my pregnancies. And I discovered through that process that what fibroids do, they suck up the estrogen from your uterus. So if you're pregnant, they can suck up that estrogen and progesterone and cause those pregnancies to terminate because the fetus is not getting the necessary hormone that it needs to grow. I finally had enough. In 2014, with the last pregnancy, my OBGYN suggested a myomectomy, which is the procedure where the surgeon goes into the womb or into the uterus and cuts away the tumors. And he removed 4 the size of oranges. All of them were the size of oranges. I had no idea that all of this was going on in my womb. Just thought I was getting a little fat, but it was actually tumors growing there. I knew something was wrong, and he told me he wasn't finished cutting, that there were many more tumors along the full lining of my uterus, and that if he kept cutting, there really would be nothing much left for a fetus to grow if I decided to try to have more children. So at that time, I just said, hey, you know what? Let's stop this. Because by then I was in the battle for 8 years. And I'll tell you a little bit more as we start discussing those symptoms. I'll tell you a little bit more about mine as I hear about yours. So essentially what happened, and I didn't know this was happening, my uterus, in general, a uterus is supposed to be maybe the size of an orange or a grapefruit. My uterus had stretched all the way below my lungs to near my lungs, and it was the size of a watermelon. So my cure, how I finally overcame, and it took me years to get to this point, I got a supracervical hysterectomy. And I know that some women, they were coached strongly or even bullied to have hysterectomies, but I waited a very long time. I tried all of my options, consulted many physicians before I did that. And what the supracervical hysterectomy is where the woman is able to keep her ovaries as well as her cervix. Okay, so that's the type of hysterectomy that I had. And I knew I could trust that particular doctor. And it took a lot of faith to get me through all of those years and through this process. I woke up after the myomectomy before he showed me the photos of those first 4 tumors that he took out. He didn't know I was awake, but he was sitting next to my bed with his head down and he was praying. And then he kind of spoke over my body. He said, "I will not let you die." And that's when I knew I can really trust him. So I just kind of, I let it go. I prayed about it and I said, hey, okay, this is how I'm going to be free from this finally. And I fought through that experience and I discovered that with this condition, not only was I being affected by it, or nor my friend at church, but many women of color, African-American women in particular, were suffering from this condition, and that it's actually a health disparity that is leading to a research gap, and that research gap continues to create that same health disparity. So it's a cyclical process that is contributing to the destruction, really, being honest, I would say, of our population. I found out also that it's not just a national problem, that it's a global problem among women of color and among Black women. So it's not just Black women in the United States, not just African Americans, but all Black women. And so this is why I formed the FIRE Fund, the Fibroids Research Fund portion of my organization. So that's my story. And today I also brought 5 additional women like myself to share their stories and to give their insight from their experience overcoming uterine fibroids. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it over. First off, I have Sabrina Apatira. Sandrell Apatira, I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, my sister's name's Sabrina.
And I knew I was going to do that because I have 2 Sabrinas. All right, Sandrell.
So I don't even know what year I found out that I had fibroids, but I just would go for my yearly exam. I always go in June around my birthday. And the doctor that I was seeing at the time just kind of glanced over the conversation. Yeah, you have some fibroids, but they're small. So, we'll just watch them. And I'm like, oh, okay, we'll just watch them. I didn't know what they were. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask any additional questions. Fast forward many years later, I was in a really high stress job and had a lot of personal stress, some situations going on that it was just a constant headache. And I also was running a business. So I've always been one of those just really busy body people doing a lot of things. And so my journey, it didn't start off with me actually finding out about fibroids. It started off with me going into adrenal fatigue, which is when your adrenal glands basically are shutting down, where you're constantly tired, you can't re-energize. So from there, it kind of was a hormonal reaction. Hormones kind of went crazy, and not sleeping well, not eating good, just kind of a crash course almost. And then from there, I started to have additional symptoms. After I was able to get that taken care of, I started seeing these other symptoms, and I was, not necessarily thinking it was anything related to, my female parts. So when I did finally go for my yearly checkup, and this was maybe 3 years ago, my gynecologist at the time, she said, well, Sandra, you have really large fibroids. Not sleeping well, not. And I said, well, really? Like, how large, could they be? Like, I come every year. And she was like, well, it just seems like they kind of got big out of nowhere, because last year doing your exam, I didn't know anything about any fibroids. So obviously it had stemmed from my situation that I had going on with my adrenals, and just, the whole hormonal imbalance and life imbalance and everything that was happening at that time. So she said to me, well, you know what, you're done having kids, right? And I naively said yes. And she said, oh, well, you don't need your uterus anyway. You could just, have a hysterectomy. I was like, hysterectomy? What? Like, no. So I didn't really do anything after that. I wasn't sick. It wasn't an immediate threat, so I didn't do anything about it. And then I started getting more physical symptoms. I started having just that heaviness you have in your belly. You never can go to the bathroom, which that was always an issue, so I never paid it much attention. And then my stomach started getting more round. And I mean, I'm not a bigger girl, so I'm like, okay, I need to do something with this belly somewhere, like waist trainers and stuff, not realizing that it was something completely different. So I did a few consultations to see what I could do about it, and I didn't want a myomectomy. I wanted something else. So I was looking into the Assessor procedure. But that was a whole situation. Not a lot of doctors were trained for it, but they weren't doing the surgery. It wasn't allowed in certain hospitals. So, but I met with about 6 surgeons, and this was maybe 2 years ago. And I would say half of them immediately said to me that, I could just have a hysterectomy. And the conversation kind of stalled around that. When I said, that's not what I want. I want, this procedure. The conversation kind of stalled immediately. So, and the other 3, it just wasn't working out, because the procedure that I was looking for, which was the Assessor procedure, like I said, they weren't practicing it. So I didn't pursue anything anymore, because I was like, well, let me go the holistic route. And that led me to a lot more research and realizing that even going the holistic route is not, it's a complete and absolute life change. Mm-hmm. It's not drinking a tea here or there or taking a supplement here or there. It's a literal complete overhaul of your entire life. You have to really change. So I'm still considering, I am considering now a myomectomy, but I am also getting ready to do a protocol for the hormonal balance protocol, just to see if I could get some shrinkage or something to give me a better chance to have a easier surgery at this point. But I'm still just running into that fight, or I've started to literally lie and say, oh, my fiance and I are going to try for another baby. I don't even have a fiance. So, but that's my lie, and I stick to it to kind of stop the conversation from veering into hysterectomy.
Right.
And it's like, you shouldn't have to go into a situation with a doctor literally lying,
right,
to keep from feeling like there's pressure in the conversation. So that's where I am now in my journey. And I've just finding out so much, and I kind of almost got bitter at one point, like, how could I not have known really anything about my own womb? I mean, I have a child, and at the time I had a child, if you had asked me what my uterus or womb was, I probably couldn't have told you. So I went through the entire process of becoming a mother and not knowing anything about my womb at all. I'm finding that out now with this situation.
And I think that stems from, I guess, it being maybe a topic of taboo, women talking about their wombs, talking about feminine issues, feminine hygiene, all of that. We really don't talk about it enough. So I can—
Not in detail.
Yeah. Definitely understand how that can happen. I went through the same thing. I was wondering, how could I have not known about this at all? I know I'm not the first woman to have it, For example, my friend at church who had it, but that was the first time in my life I'd ever heard of uterine fibroids.
Yeah. When it was just casually mentioned that I had them and that we'll just watch them, I don't know how, when you're young and you're really healthy, it's easy for things to kind of go over your head. Like you're like, can I get up out of here now? I'm ready to go. What's my copay? Let me go. So, I didn't even give it a second thought. And even recently, as much as I am into my health now, I did a CBC, and my primary, it was during this time of the coronavirus and everything. So we had a telehealth appointment. And she said, well, your hemoglobin and iron is kind of low, but everything else is fine. Your cholesterol is good, and this and that, and this and that. And I did not even understand that anemia was such a serious problem, and ended up a few months later literally having an anemic crisis, and like literally not being able to breathe or walk on my own because my blood had dropped that low. And it's just like, I know that I guess I just really depended on doctors to be the health authority in my life, but you have to just have your own health, a pulse of your own health. Like you can't depend on them to tell you what's going on with your body, and you can't depend on them to alert you to what's serious or not, because this is at the time I'm meeting with surgeons and I'm going to my doctor's appointments and I'm getting blood work and I'm doing all these things, and still ended up in an anemic crisis that completely took me off guard. Like I was so disoriented. I had to take an Uber to work because I could not even get in my car and drive. And I didn't even know anemia was that serious. So that's where I am in my journey. And I hope that the women that listen to this, that it's a learning curve to learn about your body. Like you have to learn anatomy. Not only do you have to learn anatomy, you have to read cues from doctors. Like you have to become an expert of your own health. And then you have to also become a police of the people that you're putting your health care in their hands. So it's definitely a learning curve for me.
Yes, absolutely. And for anyone dealing with this particular condition, and we see from the lack of research and then the sparse research that is available, that there's also a learning curve for the medical community. I pulled up an article from 2014 in Reproductive Sciences, volume 21, issue 9. The article is titled Uterine Fibroid Research, a Work in Progress. And the first paragraph says that uterine fibroids are the most common disease of reproductive age women, affecting 25% of African American women at the age of 25. So even by the age of 25, back in 2014, they were saying that 25% of African American women were affected. But guess what? By the age of 50, that percentage is already up to 80 to 90%.
Wow.
So it more than doubles by the time, we're 50 years of age. And it mentions in the same article that it's a global health disparity. So it's not just in the United States, and they don't know the causation as of yet. And you mentioned that you were on a stressful job. I believe stress definitely has a lot to do with it, as it does with many conditions that we develop if we're in a high stress environment or in a stressful time, in our life.
But what's really weird is that like the medical community, the traditional medical community, say that they don't know what causes them, but in the holistic community, they will tell you right away what causes it. When you go, if you're into Chinese medicine, they'll tell you right away, like what these issues are and where they come from. So it's so weird to see the contrast in information and how this community, who is supposed to be the authorities, who are backed by our insurance,
Right.
don't seem to know anything except where to cut and what to pull out. And then on this side, these are supposed to be the quacks and the people with this unfounded research in medicine, that they'll tell you exactly what it is. And to be honest, I found this side, the quacks, being a lot more knowledgeable and able to offer more release and more options than the medical community.
I've seen articles where causation has been attributed to possibly perms, the chemicals from perming your hair, of course, diets, being overweight, things of that nature, which the traditional medical community, and I hate to use that word traditional, because actually the holistic community is the traditional.
Yes.
But they attribute it to it being, people being overweight as well. All right, thank you so much, Sandrell.
Welcome.
Next up, we have Dawn Stevenson. Can you share your story with us and some of the insight that you gained as you battled with uterine fibroids?
Yes. It was probably about 2.5, 3 years ago. I'm 49 years old and I have 4 adult children. So, and I've always been able to maintain my weight, about a 4 or 6. And I just could not shake the weight. There was no pain, no nothing. So I went to the doctor, and I was on I had a very stressful job. I would sit from the time that I got there to the time I left. I wouldn't get up and move around, maybe to go get water, use the bathroom, that sort of thing. I wouldn't take a lunch. Sometimes, depending on, and it was the managers. They made it rough. Even month end, we could work 14 days straight, and they didn't care. They didn't care as long as the work was getting done. So I went to the doctor, and he said, "You have fibroids." And I'm like, "What is that?" Because I've always been a healthy person. I've always been able to lose weight when needed. So I've never been sick a day in my life. So when he said that, and I said, "Well, what is that?" So he was telling me about it, and I said, "Well, where did it come from?" And so I ended up crying, because that's what I do. And he was just like, "Well, you just have to have a hysterectomy." And I'm like, "What?" I mean, because I'm thinking, is that the only way to get rid of them? And so he was like, "Yeah." So I called my husband, and I pretty much figured he was giving me a death sentence. So my husband, he's in the medical field, and he was like, "Dawn, calm down. You can't let this, we'll talk it through." And so I was like, okay. But prior to me not being able to shake the weight, probably a year before that, my cycle went from 3 days, start to finish, to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a crime scene every single day. Mm-hmm. But I was just like, okay. And then I would have days where I couldn't even get out of bed. I couldn't stay woke. I was just drowsy. And my husband would just tuck me in bed, and that's where I would stay to get my rest, because he's like, "Okay, you need to get your rest out. You've been working, So I'm like, okay. So when they told me about the fibroids, I was like, oh, that's what all this is. So he said, "You have to have a hysterectomy." And I was like, because the way he said it was like I had to make a decision that day. And I was like, no, I can't, And so he's like, "Okay, well, we'll discuss it on your next visit," which I think was like 3 months later. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to be ready to do that in 3 months. I don't even know what this is. I need to do my own research, So he ended up giving me birth control to control the bleeding. And it did. It pretty much stopped, because I don't think I had a cycle for the entire time I was on the birth control, which was like for 3 months. My fibroid was the size of an 18-week-old fetus. Mm. So my self-esteem was beat up. My attitude was really bad. And I was lost. I was lost. I didn't know what to do. So then one day I woke up and my left leg is swollen. And it wasn't, slightly swollen. And so I had looked at it and I said, "Okay, Dawn, don't go from 0 to 2,000, because that's what I do. It might just be your imagination. But then I started getting this pain up my leg. So I was telling my husband, and actually we're dual city. So he works in one city and then he comes home. So he was at work. And so that weekend he was on call. So I went to the other city, and he's like, "Why are you limping?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I think I might have pulled something in my leg," or, and he was like, "Okay, well, we need to take you to the emergency room." I was like, no. I said, "No, we don't need to. I think I might have pulled." So I'm going through all these scenarios in my head because I'm thinking I hadn't done anything. Come to find out it was a blood clot. Mm. My left leg had swollen up 2 times bigger than my right leg. And I couldn't wear shoes, nothing. I was down for an entire month. The ER doctor said the birth control gave me the blood clot. The blood clot was the size of my entire left leg. It was the full length of my entire left leg. So they took me off the birth control. So when I went to my OB, he said, maybe, he said it's possible, but we do need to take you off the birth. It's good they took you off the birth control. But I think the fibroid is just so big that it's blocking the blood flow to your left leg. Okay. So again, that went with myself. And this for me, because I had no pain, nothing. The only thing that I had was my cycle and the weight gain. I come from a background of being having an eating disorder. So the weight gain was a big thing for me. So they put me on a blood thinner for the blood clot, and I've been on that for about 1.5 years because they wanted to keep monitoring. So in turn, he sent me to an internal medicine doctor to see why I got this blood clot, because none of my family members have had blood clots. So they did that whole panel of blood, taking the blood and everything. Everything came back normal except for me being anemic. I've been anemic my entire life. So I've had to my husband has been very supportive. So he has helped me with the self-esteem part, because he tells me I'm beautiful every day. He calls me beautiful. And if you look on my page, the background on my page says, he calls me beautiful like it's my name. And that's exactly true. But when you're dealing with someone like me, as far as eating disorder, then having this blood clot, and then having these fibroids, and you don't know what to do. I've done all kind of research. I was taking all kind of vitamins, thinking that, maybe that'll shrink the fibroids. Then I was doing the castor oil packs. I wasn't very consistent with those. I was doing all these herbal teas. And so now I just kind of come to the point where that I think I'm probably just going to do the hysterectomy and just be done. I'm 49. I have my children. I'm not having any more children. The last time I saw my doctor, and this was right before COVID, and I went in there, and that's every single time I went to the doctor, that was their thing. Well, let's schedule your appointment for your hysterectomy. And so the last time I went in there, he said it, and I just went off. I did. I said, "Is that the only thing y'all know how to do?" And both my doctors, one is older and one is younger. So I would think between the two that they would be able to come together with something other than cutting on me. Right. So I just went off on him, and I said, "Is that the only thing that you know how to do?" I said, "You tell me that 85% of women have them. Why is research not being done? Why are y'all not concerned about this? Why is the first thing that you come out your mouth is to cut on people?" I said, "That makes absolutely no sense to me." And he was kind of taken aback. He was actually stunned because I was yelling.
And it's a good thing that you spoke up.
And and he said, no, that's not the first thing that we do. He said, but if they're not bothering you, I said, I said, it doesn't have to bother me. I said, the weight is what's bothering me, you know, but my mom has them. But my mom is a little person too. And she says the same thing. Well, if it's not bothering you, because hers don't bother her. I said, but just because it doesn't bother you and you don't mind the little bit of weight that you put on, it's not the same for me, especially with my background of my eating disorder. You know, that's not working for me. So my doctor, after I went off on him, and he was just kind of, he's like, okay, well, he wanted to do another x-ray on my leg to make sure the blood clotting went down, because again, having this surgery, which I'm not really sure why he kept pushing it on me, because it would put me more at risk because of my blood clot, you know. So I don't know. I'm still confused. I was really excited when I saw the bill that Kamala Harris.
Yes.
I'm really excited about that. Even in my weight loss groups that I'm in, you know, there's women that always say, you know, I'm losing weight all over the place, but I just can't seem to lose it in my stomach. And the first thing I always say is, have you checked to see if you have fibroids? And a lot of women is like, no. Oh, maybe I need to check that. Oh, you know, and then I think for me, just like Sandra, mine just came out the blue, because the prior year I didn't have them, or at least they were small where they weren't noticeable or something, because, you know, like I said, I've always been able to shake the weight and get back into my 4s or my 6s. You know, I've always been able to do that. And then just all of a sudden, I wasn't able to. So today I say that I've decided to go ahead and do the surgery. Tomorrow will probably be a different story for me.
And you take your time making that decision, because that's your body. And we have to take ownership of our bodies and ownership of our health.
And then, you know, and then they always say, oh, well, menopause, you know, it should help shrink them some. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm 49, so when is that supposed to happen? Another 5-6 years that I have to deal with what I'm going. And again, I have absolutely no pain whatsoever, none. And my cycle have actually went back down to 4 days. So the only thing for me is my weight. Even I exercise about 5-6 times a week, walking on the treadmill, whatever. And I see the inches lost, but my stomach is not going anywhere. So I kind of feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I still do it, but I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I drink a gallon of water a day. I mean, my diet is not bad. I mean, I'm not a junk food eater. I may eat meat once a week. My husband doesn't eat beef or pork. I still eat it when I want some meat, but I may eat meat only once a week, something like that. So I don't know. I was really thrown for a loop with this.
I found in my experience that trying to decrease in your diet food that had hormone in it, like meat, that would help. And I found again that it did help. It helped with the symptoms, but in my case, the fibroids were still growing and they were starting to cluster.
Well, and see, because my husband, he wants to get buy a farm, because he said, well, if you're gonna eat meat, then at least I'll know what's going into the meat if we have our own, you know, and then we have a garden, so we have our vegetables and different things like that. But I don't, and it frustrates me when I'm in these other fibroid groups, because they'll give you these, or give people false hope on what to do, or the scams, and people be falling for it. And I'm like, you know, and then people will tell you how it happens, whatever. And I'm thinking, you know, normal doctors can't even tell you that, but like Sandrell said, you know, the folks that's getting money don't know what to do.
What to do.
You know,
I'm gonna
so
pass the field real quick. I don't mean to cut you off. I don't want
oh no, I'm sorry, I'm done.
but thank you so much for sharing. We're definitely going to revisit this, and I hope that you all will join me again when we have more time to discuss it. Again, it's a much needed conversation. Ms. Robinson, is there any takeaway that you can give us before we have to end it? Did you want to share anything with us? You're on mute. So while you come off of mute, there you go.
My story is just like everyone else. I just recently, not even like almost like a year ago, found out that I had fibroids through a pap smear. She said that my uterus felt enlarged and scheduled me for an ultrasound. Got the ultrasound, and I had to make another appointment to go back just for her to tell me that I have the fibroids. And then from that, let's do the hysterectomy. I've canceled and rescheduled it twice. And all of the symptoms that you pretty much named, I have them, and I go through it. I'm 45 and I have to walk around with the pins on, because I just don't, I'm bleeding one day, might not be bleeding tomorrow. And you know, you just never know when it happened. And I'm recently separated. I can't even think about trying to have a social life because I'm always bleeding. I'm always tired. I'm trying to lose weight, but taking all these birth control pills and things like that, you know, your hormones is going crazy. You know, it keeps me depressed a lot.
So we're hearing about the emotional impact as well, the psychological impact along with the physical impact. And yes,